I know I'm obviously probably number one right now.
Let's talk about people that are in your lives and Lisa's lives. Was there any extramarital affairs going on?
Hi everyone, I'm Kevin and welcome to Just Thought Lounge. This is the true crime channel that delivers serious, well-balanced coverage of the cases that really make you think. Today's case comes from Iowa, where a young newlywed couple were launching their careers in law enforcement and starting a family. Seth and Lisa Techel, both 23 years old, already had strong roots in agency, a small rural community. Lisa worked as a jailer in nearby Washington County and was a reserve deputy in Wapello alongside her father, Deputy Todd Caldwell. Seth had aspirations to join the sheriff's department himself. In May 2011, he was working a security job, but had just been offered a role as a jailer in Wapello. He was keen to be welcomed into the fold. But on the 26th of May, Seth Techel would find himself on the other, less desirable side of the law. A panicked 911 call placed early in the morning brought deputies rushing to the couple's home, where they found Lisa, 5 months pregnant, dead from a single gunshot while she still lay in her bed. Immediately there is a suspect, but it is not Seth. Seth and Lisa were the only two individuals known to be in their home that morning, but Seth claimed that his wife was shot while he was in the shower. There's a lot to examine here, so let's take a look. Seth Techel met Lisa Caldwell at his father's local bowling alley while the two were both teenagers. Lisa was an expert bowler and played for a state championship team. The two worked together at the alley and they fell in love. In the autumn of 2011, they married and settled into a trailer home in rural agency. They were expecting a baby girl. They planned to name her Zoe. Agency is a quaint village. Less than 1,000 people call it their home. It was, and I assume still is, a place where everyone knows one another. To those in agency acquainted with the young Techel couple, life looked good. On the morning of the 25th of May, the Techels ran some errands. They went by the credit union where they chatted with a worker there about Lisa's pregnancy and the anticipation of starting a family. They also stopped at a local restaurant where their waitress noted the ease and general normalcy of the expecting young couple. Nothing at all was amiss, on the surface. Hidden from the view of the close-knit community in agency was a troubled marriage. In January, Lisa had come across some text messages exchanged between her husband and a coworker of his, Rachel McFarland. The two had met late 2011 when they worked security at Job Corps and began messaging, first just on Facebook. Things developed rapidly, however, and by December, the two were carrying on what could be considered a secret affair. They were not sleeping together, but they had been sending each other sexually charged messages and photos for months. Having been found out by his wife, Seth swore to stop speaking with Rachel. But instead, he purchased a second phone, registered it under the name Rick Jones, as well as an email account under the same name, and continued his illicit correspondence. Seth was messaging Rachel throughout the day while he and his wife were in town, at the credit union, and grabbing some lunch. The last messages to his girlfriend, sent after 11 p.m. that night, confirmed to Rachel what she had wanted to hear. Seth had told Lisa he wanted a divorce and she would be packing her things the next day. In their cozy rural home outside of town, the Techels' alarm clock rang out early in the morning of the 26th of May. It was 4:30 a.m. and Seth rose to let their dog Remington outside. Lisa wanted a bit more sleep, Seth said. Although the dog did not bark or growl, Seth believed the dog was looking like something might have been outside or was acting like there was something fishy going on. He went back inside, reset his alarm for 5 o'clock, and lay back down. When the alarm sounds again, he gets into the shower. Only minutes later, the sound of a gunshot rings out from the bedroom. Seth got out the shower, grabbed a towel, ran into the bedroom, and turned on the light. The dog was in the bedroom closet, scared and shaking, while Lisa was lying in the bed. Seth went to Lisa, shook her, and asked her if she was okay. Lisa moaned a little bit, and Seth saw there was a hole in the covers, so he pulled them back and saw a hole in Lisa's bra. He then heard a noise like a little thud coming from the living room, so he grabbed his gun, a pistol, from the nightstand, removed it from its holster, and ran down the hallway. No one was in the living room, but the front door was wide open, so Seth ran out on the porch but did not see or hear anything. When he ran back into the bedroom to Lisa, he says she was unresponsive and definitely not breathing. He called 911.
Okay, 911, speaking.
She's not breathing.
Does she have any medical problems?
She's been shot. I was in the shot and getting ready for work, and I heard a gunshot. And I came running out, and she shot in the side and started
The first officer on the scene rushed towards the home. This officer, like most that would be called out to the trailer that morning, knew the Techels personally. As responders made their way onto the property, Seth turned visibly distressed, striking a truck outside and sobbing next to the fence line. One officer observed that he appeared hysterical, but noted he thought it odd that Seth didn't have tears in his eyes. However, there was no one on the scene that day who openly doubted Seth was anything but distraught. Paramedics found Lisa dead from a gunshot to her left chest. She was still warm to the touch, but there was nothing they could do for her. In addition to 2 paramedics, reports of the crime scene state that a lot of people showed up. Seth and Lisa had close connections in the law enforcement community in and around Wapello County. Her father, a deputy in the sheriff's department, was contacted within minutes. Reports state that many people went into the trailer, including Lisa's father, Deputy Todd Caldwell, and her stepmother, Amy, as well as multiple members of the Wapello County Sheriff's Department. After viewing the tragic scene inside, Deputy Caldwell believed instantly that he knew who was responsible, and it wasn't his son-in-law. He is captured on dashcam footage hollering at colleagues to go get him now.
Go get him, now.
And the other officers with the Wapello County Sheriff knew exactly who he was referring to, the Techels' mentally unstable neighbor, Brian Tate. Brian was a disabled veteran who had a history of mental health issues. He was diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic. In the weeks leading to Lisa's murder, Seth and Brian had been engrossed in an escalating feud, culminating in police intervention more than once. The feud began one night when Seth was driving home and he saw a dead deer on the road and he moved the carcass into the ditch. Then in the spring, Lisa saw the deer hide hanging high up in a tree on Brian's side of the fence line. Later, they found the deer hide in their burn barrel. The hide was then thrown back and forth between the properties. Tensions increased between the Techels and their neighbor, eventually leading Seth to encourage younger friends of his to mess with the older man's property. Brian called the sheriff's department to complain about what he called acts of terrorism being committed against him by the Techels. It was none other than Deputy Todd that was called out to speak with him. The veteran pointed to what he believed was dog and/or horse feces dumped by the bucket load onto his property. A week later, he had a series of rocks thrown towards his shed, denting the sides. Unaware that he was speaking with Lisa's father, Brian told the deputy that the Techels were terrorists. Todd left the encounter feeling uneasy about the stability of his daughter's neighbor. He reported formally to colleagues to be on alert near the man and that he kept a loaded shotgun near to his person. Todd also spoke with Seth about the dispute and told his son-in-law that if he was involved in harassing the older man to knock it off. Seth did so, apparently, and thought the dispute was over. But the week of May 14th, Lisa called him at work and said there was a deer hide discarded in their driveway. Seth called the sheriff. This time, Todd and a colleague went to talk to Brian. He was agitated and continued to call the Techels terrorists. Shortly afterwards, Seth noted footprints near his fence line and had to rush his dog Remington to the vet after he suspected he was poisoned. Remington had been drinking from a saucer outside. Based on the account Seth provided of what had occurred that morning, local law enforcement had reason to believe that an armed intruder, possibly Brian Tate, may still be within the vicinity of the home. Prompted by Todd's calls for urgency, officers on scene prepared to confront Brian at his home. But when they arrived, fully armed, prepared for a potentially violent response, they found Brian enjoying a pleasant morning with his mother, who insisted he had been at home sleeping all night. Brian was on his medication and getting appropriate rest. He invited them to sit on his porch and have a chat.
I went to bed about 8:30.
Right after I did.
After Mom did.
Did you hear anything in the middle of the night last night?
I was in bed, and normally I would have been up doing guard duty with all this that happened, but I'm schizophrenic paranoid.
You said earlier, Brian, that you'd sit outside here
At night?
At night, yeah. When's the last time you did that?
Oh, it's been a good week or so.
Week or so?
They don't want me to do guard duty anymore. They want me to get sleep take more medications.
You were such a calm, quiet guy until this vandalism started, and then you're just like a different person.
I was Mr. Nice Guy for a long time. It done me no good. People took advantage of me, so I'm kind of taking a different approach to life right now, being more serious and more not such a nice guy.
The Techel property was blocked off with police tape, and the area surrounding the trailer was searched, both for a potential shooter that had escaped the home and for any relevant evidence to the crime. The Division of Criminal Investigation, DCI, was called to assist with the investigation. They arrived by 10:30 that morning. Responding officers did not observe any marks on Seth. It's unclear if a formal physical inspection took place, but it seems it did not. He was also not swabbed for gun residue, nor was Brian Tate. The DCI also did not take Seth's clothing or scrape under his fingernails. Deputies checked the shower to see if it was still wet, and it was still dripping. There was also a wet towel. Items of potential evidentiary value were collected from the trailer. 2 of Seth's cell phones were found. His regular mainline mobile was sitting on the dressing table, while his second Rick Jones line was confiscated from his truck. The home was examined for blood and fingerprints. Fingerprint lifts from the door were identified as from Seth, Lucas the old roommate, and 2 more of Seth's close friends. 2 cigarette butts were submitted for DNA analysis. A partial male DNA profile was developed from a cigarette butt from the driveway, but it did not match any of the known samples submitted. There was no sign of forced entry or a struggle. Seth stated that he likely left the door unlocked after letting Remington out at 4:30, so whoever entered could have done so easily. Nothing of value was missing from the home, so a burglary was deemed unlikely. On the first day of investigation, no murder weapon was identified. As a matter of process, Seth agreed to an interview with the DCI that afternoon. Only portions of the interrogation have been released at this point, but we know from local reports that the first 4 hours of this 5-hour-long interview were non-confrontational. The interview was conducted by DCI agent Chris Thomas. Sitting in was a local deputy who knew Seth personally, perhaps to place him at ease. They approached the discussion sympathetically.
I just protected us 10 feet away from her. Why can't they still be alive? Why? Why couldn't I have done something to protect the woman that I love?
Seth began by repeating the story that he had initially told police, who responded to his property.
I turned the shower on. I wasn't in there for more than 5 minutes, and I heard this loud noise. And I will be honest, I had every intention on shooting whoever it was. I don't see anybody. I don't hear nothing. I run back inside. I run into the bedroom. And I said, Lisa, are you okay? And she's not breathing.
When Seth was asked who he thought killed Lisa, he pointed the finger at Brian Tate.
Who was the first person that came to your mind?
Tate, my crazy-ass neighbor who thinks that we're terrorists. Todd said that Tate the whole time was sitting on his front porch and he was rubbing a loaded shotgun.
Things weren't adding up for Agent Thomas. There was no indication that an intruder, Brian Tate, or anyone else had been in his home, and no witnesses saw anyone fleeing the scene. Agent Thomas asked Seth to make a list of the firearms that were in his house, which he did. All of Seth's registered guns were accounted for. While the interrogation was taking place, investigators from the DCI, in coordination with the local police, were speaking to others in Seth and Lisa's life, including a close friend of Seth's named Colton Millard. Colton told DCI agents who were working the murder scene that Seth had confided in him about an affair he was carrying on with his coworker Rachel. Seth even shared a few of the photos that Rachel had sent him. This information was promptly relayed to Agent Thomas, who was still conducting a friendly interview with the grieving husband.
We're going to ask you some tough things.
That's fine. I know I'm obviously probably number one right now.
Let's talk about people that are in your lives and Lisa's lives. Was there any extramarital affairs, drama?
The interview came to an end when Seth's father succeeded in finding him a lawyer. But the damage for Seth had been done. The interview had convinced the DCI that Seth had a lot to hide, and his story simply didn't make much sense. The murder weapon was found the next day, about 90 feet from the front door of the home, a Mossberg Model 500 shotgun. It was laying in plain view, though slightly obscured by some tall grass. Next to where the gun sat was the police line cordoning off the property. The gun was feet away from a tree that had been sprayed with paint and wrapped in crime scene tape, in an area where deputies had been present on the day, yet somehow it wasn't spotted. The owner of the gun was Seth's former roommate, Lucas Howell. He had left it in the trailer when he moved out. The list of guns that Seth had provided to the DCI the day before had omitted this particular shotgun. Lucas said it had been kept in the trailer in different locations, but it was almost always loaded. When the shotgun was discovered, it had one fired round jammed in the chamber. Friends of Seth's that had shot the gun with him many times said that it had never jammed. The inference was that someone unfamiliar with the gun must have last fired it. Additionally, it was suggested that had the weapon been in this location since the murder, it would have been seen. It seemed plausible that it was dumped back there later by the intruder, perhaps the neighbor, who snuck back to the property to leave the gun near the crime scene boundary for the police to find the next day. 4 unfired deer slugs remained in the magazine. The DCI laboratory determined the Mossberg shotgun had fired the deer slug that killed Lisa. The investigation was moving at a rapid pace. Meanwhile, the small town of Agency and the broader law enforcement community was grieving the loss of one of their own and grappling with a disturbing thought: that someone in their community, a man they knew personally and who was set to join their ranks as a jailer within weeks, was capable of murdering his beautiful young wife and unborn child. As disturbing as the thought was, the evidence against Seth was compelling. He was arrested and arraigned, and on the 9th of July, roughly 6 weeks after the murder, Seth was formally charged.
Techel has been charged with murder in the first degree and non-consensual termination of a human pregnancy, which is a Class B felony and carries a penalty of 25 years. Of course, murder in the first degree, a Class A felony with a maximum penalty of life in prison.
How confident are you that you arrested the right person?
I am very confident.
Seth pled not guilty and went to trial in February the next year.
And that is that Seth Techel is the one who shot and killed his wife and terminated her pregnancy. Seth Techel is the one who was behind a 12-gauge shotgun. Seth Techel is the one who was behind the shotgun, who pulled the trigger, who caused the deer slug to slam into his wife and kill her.
The prosecution emphasized what they saw as the simplicity of the motive: love and lust. Seth wanted out of his marriage, but he feared that divorcing Lisa would ruin his relationship with his father-in-law, Deputy Todd, and by extension destroy his chances of becoming a deputy sheriff himself. The messages retrieved from both of his cell phones, as well as emails exchanged with Rachel McFarland, painted a damning picture of a man anxious to leave his wife. Rachel testified they sent sexual and flirtatious texts back and forth, and their relationship moved beyond emailing and texting when they kissed each other in late February or early March 2012. Rachel testified her relationship with her then-boyfriend ended in mid-May, basically because of Seth. The defense implied that this could have given the ex-boyfriend a reason to be angry with Seth, and maybe even seek revenge, though there is little to suggest that he was that angry. Rachel told the jury about how her relationship with Seth began and progressed.
He added me on Facebook and asked for my telephone number, and just text messages from there started becoming more than just coworkers. It went from just normal conversations to flirtatious text messages. It became more sexual, asking me to send pictures or I don't know, just showing off my body, I guess. And he started asking if, when he got a divorce from his wife, if I'd move in with him.
On May 20th, 2012, through a series of texts, Rachel, in essence, told Seth she did not like being alone and wanted to be with him. Seth told Rachel that he wanted to divorce Lisa and move in with her, asking her to give him 2 more weeks. When Rachel asked what he meant, Seth repeated, "Just give me 2 more weeks." Messages showed that on May 24th, 2 days before the murder, Rachel was excited Seth was going to ask Lisa for a divorce that evening, and she expressed her love for Seth. She asked him if he really wanted to be with her, and he responded, forever. He told Rachel he loved her and to wish him luck. Weeks before Lisa's death, a coworker of Seth's overheard a phone conversation he had with Lisa that had turned quite heated. He said that they were definitely arguing. Michael Shackle worked at Job Corps with both Seth and Rachel.
Was it an argument?
Yes.
After Seth Techel got off the phone with Lisa Techel, did he make any comment to you about Lisa?
Yes, he did.
What did he say?
He said basically that it would be easier if she was in a car wreck and died.
In the months prior to the trial, the Techels' neighbor, Brian Tate, passed away. This did not slow the accusations directed towards him, however. The defense team argued that Brian was the likely murderer. His fingerprints were not obtained before he passed away, and it's unclear if his DNA was ever tested against other evidence pulled from the scene, such as the profile obtained from the cigarette butt found on the drive. A parade of witnesses were called to speak to the threat posed by the disabled vet. Tyler Batterson, a friend of Seth's, would testify that in April 2012, Seth asked him and 3 of Tyler's friends to mess with Tate. He and the others then dumped 5-gallon buckets of dog feces on the man's porch and on his vehicle.
He didn't really tell us to do anything. He just told us to mess up his yard a little. So that's all we were gonna do.
Did he tell you specifics of how he wanted you to mess up his yard?
Nope, whatever happened was what came out of our heads.
The following weekend, Tyler said he and 2 others threw rocks onto Brian's garage and shed. They had told Seth what they had done. Seth initially denied having any part in this. Regardless, he had given his neighbor good reason for grievance. But was that enough to lead him to murder? The 56-year-old had a history of mental health issues. Months after Lisa's murder, Brian had been involuntarily committed to a center for treatment. His physician, Dr. James Trahan, testified that Brian had bipolar disorder and had delusions that he was the victim of a government conspiracy. The doctor said that his condition made him dangerous and that his perpetual drug use made these symptoms much worse.
And he would stubbornly continue to use marijuana at intervals despite his doctor's recommendations to the contrary. Part of it may have been the result of some false fixed belief, a delusional perception that the marijuana was somehow healing to him, when in fact it was something that could destabilize him.
Other neighbors of Brian Tate and the Techels also recounted to the jury what they knew. Drusilla and Jack Chickering spoke with Brian Tate on more than one occasion about the Techels.
That's when he came over and asked us if we had any problem with him. And that's when he's saying, well, I'm schizophrenic and, I don't always get along with people.
His words were, if the sheriff's department had done their job, none of this would have happened.
Jack said that Brian was referring to the sheriff's department not addressing the complaints that he had made to them over the vandalism to his home. Vandalism that he believed was committed by the Techels. Both the DCI and Wapello police were criticized for narrowing their focus to Seth Techel as the suspect so rapidly after discovering his affair. Their tunnel vision caused them to overlook items at the scene of the crime that could have pointed to the real killer, said the defense. They pointed to a peanut butter sandwich and a discarded glove, both found on the porch of the Techels' home. If these were left by the killer after stalking the front entrance in the night, they should have been collected and tested. The DCI agent questioned on this point responded that these items were ignored because, in his experience, the peanut butter sandwich had no probative value in solving the case. The trial lasted almost 3 full weeks. After 4 agonizing days of deliberations, the jury came back deadlocked. They were split 10-2, with the majority voting guilty. A mistrial was declared. Discussions in the jury chamber had apparently turned heated. Accusations of misconduct were reported to the judge, and jurors referred to one woman, an unwavering not guilty vote, as a plant because she was so convinced of Seth's innocence. Initial votes from the jury members reported 9 guilty and 3 not guilty on the first day of deliberations. After 3 more days of what one juror described as total utter hell, only one juror was convinced to move positions. Seth went back to trial 2 months later. There's no change to the arguments or evidence presented in Seth's second trial. The main point of difference was the location, moving from Ottumwa to Mount Pleasant due to the significant publicity received by the case the first time around. This second trial commenced late October 2013. On the 15th of November, the court declared a mistrial again when the jury could not reach a unanimous verdict. Reports of the deliberations in this second trial mirrored those of the first. Discussions were very heated and certain jurors held firm to reasonable doubt, much to the frustration of the other members.
Then we just started going over the case and stuff, and then we had another vote, and it was 9-3, and it stayed 9-3 the whole time. It never did change. I just kind of look around, kind of look at people's expressions and emotions and stuff. You know, I deal a lot. I base a lot of my decisions on the way people act and what, you know, how they present themselves. I feel sorry for the families, both sides, because neither one of them's got a closure.
The state immediately made it clear that they intended to retry the case a third time. Another change of venue request was granted, now moving the case to a third county.
Techel found himself back in court for a bond hearing. Techel appeared at the Monroe County Courthouse with his lawyer, Stephen Gardner. Gardner filed a motion last week to withdraw from the case, citing health and economic reasons, specifically telling Judge Dan Wilson today that the two grueling trials had taken their toll on his health.
Days before the trial was set to commence, the defense became aware of some unexpected and maybe extremely relevant information. Police reports showed that Lisa's cell phone was collected next to where she lay on the morning of the murder. It was not, however, listed as one of the items collected by investigators. After a few failed attempts to access the contents on the device, the phone was finally successfully examined in May 2014, and the contents were a bit surprising. Text messages found on the phone between Lisa and a co-worker of hers at the jail, Jason Tinnis, revealed an affair that had been taking place since before her marriage to Seth and appeared to continue after the wedding. Jason was questioned by a Washington County deputy at the request of someone in the Wapello County Sheriff's Office. He lied about the affair initially to police because he did not want his wife to know about it. Jason also claimed that Lisa and he ended their sexual relationship about 2 months before she was murdered because they both realized what they were doing was wrong. They continued texting until near the end of April. Jason and Lisa had even discussed the possibility that he could be the father of her child, but he said he knew he was not because there was a period of time we were not engaged with sexual relations, and it was simple math. On July 11, 2014, the Friday before the trial, Seth's new defense team requested a continuance, the third time they had done so, based on information revealed during Jason Tinnis's deposition. It was denied. The third trial commenced 3 days later. Defense counsel argued that the affair with Lisa gave Jason a motive to kill her. They now counted 3 other potential suspects: Brian Tate, Rachel's dejected boyfriend with whom she left to be with Seth, and now also Jason Tinnis. Jason denied having anything to do with Lisa's death. His wife Elizabeth testified that he had been at home with her at the time the murder took place. A rush DNA analysis was conducted that month that showed that Jason was not the father of Lisa's unborn child. It also excluded him as a match to the DNA profile found on the cigarette butt in the Techel's drive. The bombshell news of Lisa's secret affair was not enough to tip the scales of the jury. In fact, on this third time around, they were finally able to reach a unanimous decision. Seth Techel was found guilty on both counts: murder in the first degree and non-consensual termination of a human pregnancy. After years of sitting through trials, Lisa's family was given the opportunity to give their impact statements to the court and to speak directly to the man that they had once loved as one of the family.
But he's a coward. Seth never talked to me after he killed Lisa, but he talked to my wife. He told her that he looked into Lisa's eyes as she moaned and took her last breath. I have nightmares about that, Seth. And in my nightmares, I always wake up wondering if Lisa was thinking, I need my dad.
In September 2014, Seth received the maximum sentence for both crimes: life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 25 years. He appealed the decision, noting that his new defense team was not afforded enough time to explore Jason Tinnis's testimony. He also contended that law enforcement had been aware of his wife's affair and had not disclosed it. These efforts were unsuccessful in the State Court of Appeals, and in 2016, the Iowa Supreme Court refused to review his case, ending his appeals process. And that was the story of Lisa and Seth Techel, the young couple from Iowa with dreams of being in law enforcement. Thanks once again for examining this case with me today. I'm Kevin, this is Just Thought Lounge, and I'll see you in the next one.